Okay, today's lesson is going to be on the properties of operations. Please make sure that you have your video notes and that you are filling them out, as well as including all of the examples in your notes. If you don't have the printed version of the notes, you can always take notes in your journal. Okay, let's get started. In math, there are certain properties that we have, things that we can do with numbers, and they call these properties of operations. And the first property is called the commutative property. The commutative property says that the order in which two numbers are added or multiplied does not change their sum or product. Now, the important clue words here are going to be added or multiplied. Okay, it does not include subtraction or division. And let me give you an example of this. If we have 5 plus 3, we can switch the order of our numbers and say 3 plus 5, and it does not change our sum. Okay, they're still both going to equal 8. 5 plus 3 is 8, and 3 plus 5 is 8. If we do this with the variables, a plus b is the same as saying b plus a. You can do the same thing with multiplication. If you have 2 times 4, you can change the order of your factors and say 4 times 2, and it doesn't change the value. You're still going to get an answer of 8. Same thing if you do a times b, that's equivalent to b times a. They're the same. It does not change the value. So you can write this down, change order. This is what the commutative property means. You can change the order of the numbers that you're adding together or the numbers that you're multiplying together, and it does not change the answer. You will still get the same answer. You see C for the C in commutative, O for order, and O is the second letter in the word commutative. Change order. Now again, this does not work for division. It does not work for subtraction. If I have 5 minus 3, I'm going to get an answer of 2. If I change the order and I do 3 minus 5, will I still get a 2? No, you'll get a negative 2. So it does not work for subtraction. The same thing for division. 10 divided by 5 will give me a 2. But if I do 5 divided by 10, if I change the order, will I get a 2? No, you get a half, don't you? Or 5/10. Okay, does not work for subtraction, does not work for division, only for addition or multiplication. So commutative property says that you can change the order of the numbers that you're adding, or you can change the order of the numbers that you're multiplying. Our second property is called the associative property. And this states that the way in which 3 numbers are grouped when they are added or when they are multiplied does not change their sum or their product. So for example, if I have 2 plus the group of 3 plus 5, I can rewrite this and change my group and group together my 2 plus 3 and then add the 5, and I will get the same answer. So let's see if it works. 3 plus 5 is 8, and when I add 2 plus 8, I get 10. If I group together my 2 plus 3, I get 5, and when I add it with this 5, I get 10. I get the same answer, don't I? The same thing is true for letters. If you have A plus the group of B plus C, you can rewrite this and regroup it. Change your group and group the A plus the B together and then add C, and you get the same value. It does not change your value. Do the same thing for multiplication. If I have 2 times the group of 5 times 3, I can change my groups and I can multiply my 2 times 5 first and then multiply that by 3. So let's do the math. 5 times 3 is 15, and when I multiply that by 2, I get 30. Over here, when I do the group of 2 times 5, I get 10, and when I multiply that by 3, I get 30. You get the same answer, so you can do that. excuse me, if you're using the letters, you can say that A times the group of B times C is equivalent to the group of A times B, that's an A there, times your C. So associative property is about the groups. You can change your groups if you're multiplying, or you can change your groups if you're adding. Again, it does not work for addition, it does not work for subtraction. Our next property is called the identity property. Okay, the sum of a number and 0 is the number itself. This means if I have 5 plus 0, it's going to give me 5. The number stays the same, it doesn't change. If I have A plus 0, my answer is going to stay A. It's like looking in a mirror. You see yourself, right? Okay, your identity stays the same. You don't change your identity. When you're multiplying, the product of a number and 1 is the number itself. So if you have 3 times 1, the number doesn't change. It stays a 3. If you have A times 1, A is not going to change. It's going to stay A. This is the identity property. The identity of the number stays the same. It will not change. Then we have the inverse properties, and we've actually already talked about the inverse properties, although we didn't call it the inverse properties. The first one says that the sum of a number and its opposite is 0. So if I have 5 plus a negative 5, that's going to give me a 0. If I have A plus a negative A, that's going to give me 0. The product of a number and its reciprocal is 1. So we learned this when we were doing fraction division. If you have 5 times 1/5, the answer is going to be 1. And to show it to you, remember when you're multiplying a whole number times a fraction, you have to put the whole number over 1 to turn it into a fraction. Multiply your numerators together. 5 times 1 is 5. Multiply your denominators together. 1 times 5 is 5. And this simplifies to 1. Same thing, if you have A times the reciprocal of A, which is 1 over A, the answer will be 1. This is the inverse properties. And our last property is called the distributive property. And the distributive property says that you can multiply a number by a sum, or you can multiply the number by each number in the sum and then add. So for example, if I have 3 times the sum of 4 plus 2, you can add the two numbers together, 4 plus 2, and get 6, and then multiply that by 3 to get 18. Or you can do what we call distribute the 3 to each number inside the group. You can multiply 3 times the first number 4 and then add that to 3 times the second number, which is 2. And 3 times 4 is 12, plus 3 times 2 is 6. 12 plus 6 is 18. You get the same answer. This is called the distributive property. If I have A times the group of B plus C, I could add B plus C together and then multiply by A, or I could distribute the A to each term, and we distribute by using these arrows to each term inside the group, and have A times B and add that to A times C, and you get the same answer. They are equivalent. That is the distributive property. So now let's determine whether or not the two expressions are equivalent, and if so, we're going to tell what property is applied. If they're not equivalent, we're going to explain why. Okay, so the first expression has 7 times, and then it has a group of 3 times 2. And we want to know, is that equivalent? Is that the same as saying the group of 7 times 3, then times 2? Look at the two expressions and ask yourself what changed. There's a 7, a 3, and a 2. A 7, a 3, and a 2. The operation is multiplication for both. The only thing that changed was the parentheses. In my first expression, the parentheses is around the 3 times 2. In my second expression, the parentheses moved to around the 7 times 3. Are these two still equivalent? Can you do that? We'll go back through your list of properties. Which property talks about the groups? Which one showed that you can move the parentheses? It was the associative property, wasn't it? It says the way in which three numbers are grouped when they are multiplied, because this is multiplication, does not change their product. So are these equivalent? Yes. Why? Because this is the associative property. And I'm going to abbreviate associative and put ASSOC. Or you could put A if you want to for associative property. So these are the same. You could actually do the math and you would see that they are the same answer. Our next example, 16 divided by 8. Is that equivalent to 8 divided by 16? Well, hopefully you said no. Okay, can't do that. Remember, these properties of operations only work for multiplication or addition. It does not work for division. So the answer to this would be no. Why? Because it's division. (16 plus 0). Is that the same as 16? Sure it is. Why? What happened here? We added 0 to the 16, and then we have 16. That's the identity property, isn't it? It didn't change. 16 stayed 16 when we added 0 to it. So this is the identity property, which I'm going to put an I. Then we have 12 minus the group of 5 minus 2, and the group of 12 minus 5 minus 2. Okay, let's see what changed. Look at the numbers first. 12, 5, and 2. 12, 5, and 2. So the numbers didn't change. The operation is subtraction all around, so that didn't change. What changed was the parentheses, the grouping. Can we do that? What operation says that? What property says that we could do that? Well, hopefully you said, hold on, it's subtraction. Properties don't work with subtraction, do they? So are these equivalent? No. Why? Because it was subtraction. If this had been addition or this had been multiplication, then yes, you could do that. That would have been the same as up here, the associative property. But this was subtraction, and the properties do not work for subtraction or division. Okay, 14 and 1 times 14. Are these equivalent? They stay the same, don't they? 1 times 14 is 14. If they stay the same, 14 and 14, that is the identity property, isn't it? So yes, these are equivalent. And the last one, 2 times the group of 4 plus 9. Is that the same as saying 2 times 4 plus 2 times 9? Well, take a look. What happened? Instead of the 4 and the 9 being grouped together in parentheses, they took the 2 and they multiplied it by the 4, right here. And then they added that to the 2 times the 9, right here. So what did they do with this 2? They distributed it. They shared it. So these are equivalent. Why? Because it's the distributive property. And we're going to work more on the distributive property coming up. Okay, now you're ready for your independent practice.